for 2025. Now, obviously, we're still in 2024, but it is now time to start thinking about getting your spring and winter containers sorted and planted out. The weather here in the UK really has turned really quite wet. We've had a miserable summer, but it's now time to remove all the summer bedding. You should have by now taken it in to the greenhouse or cold frame, or maybe into the porch or house. Any tender plants that you want to start thinking about protecting for this season. And that leaves me with this lovely vintage dolly tub. This one during the summer months is occupied by a large decorative ornamental banana, which I take in. And now it is now empty, and I am just about to start planting this year's bulb lasagna. So I thought I would bring you along with me while we did it. All I've done is remove the soil down to about 9 inches on this one. There is absolutely no need, if you are confident you're not carrying pests and disease problems, things like vine weevil through in your compost, there is absolutely no reason that you need to throw away all of the media in each pot every single year. It gets very, very time consuming, and more importantly, very wasteful and very, very expensive. So the compost is now going to remain. And what I've done is I've taken this down to the same depth and planting level as I put my bulbs in last year. And what I'm going to do to begin with, I'll talk you through what I'm going to plant. There's going to be 3 layers to this particular lasagna. I have purchased bulbs this year from Farmer Gracie, and I'm actually going to be adding a tulip, a new variety of tulip from Farmer Gracie. This one is called Sweet Valley. A colour combination I've put together myself. I'm also going to be adding another tulip to the bank. I like to mix my tulips wherever possible. I know it's very tempting to create just one particular variety of tulip, give you a mass display. Personally, I like to mix them up, and it also means that things like a bulb lasagna, if you plant more than one type of tulip, you'll quite often find they'll actually stagger their flowering times. And although these both flower at April, May, these probably will overlap by a couple of weeks, and one variety might flower on a little bit later and one might flower a little bit earlier, giving you a much longer interest period. This particular dolly tub is seen from the French doors down on our patio, so it's a really important one that this looks really, really good. It's also a high traffic area next to the workshop up here in the garden, so pass it quite a lot. So first of all, we're going to do the Sweet Valley tulips. Those are from Farmer Gracie. Also from Farmer Gracie, Foxy Foxtrot, which is an absolutely fabulous name for a tulip. So those are going in. They will be planted alongside the very, very standard tete-a-tete, Narcissi tete-a-tete. Absolutely adore this. This is a really, really hard-working daffodil, a miniature variety reaching only between 6 and 8 inches tall. This is perfect for growing in a container, really hard-working, and this one will then be bedded out into the wildflower meadow once these bulbs have been spent and used for next year. I mentioned I was also going to be adding a type of allium, and I'm going to be adding one called Rose Beauty, or Rosy Beauty to this as well. These are going to be quite high. This dolly tub is again already about 50-60 centimeters tall. I want to balance it out with something quite tall. The tulips are going to be coming up to about 50 centimeters. The alliums, this one is Rosy Beauty, is going to be coming up quite tall, about 60-70 centimeters on top of that. So those are what's going in. I'm going to put those to one side. And I also am going to start by actually creating a layer to put everything on top of. And I'll tell you for why. At the very beginning of this tutorial, I said to you, I'm not removing all of the compost and media from the bottom of the pot. And I'm doing that for a reason. One, I don't need to throw it away. And secondly, I'm going to now add a layer of horticultural grit. It's going to do 2 things. One, it's going to actually make sure that the bulbs don't sit in cold and wet soil, and also rot off during the winter. It is also going to give me a layer within the pot. So when I'm digging the bulbs out next spring and moving them onto somewhere else, putting them into my wildflower meadow, for instance, or throwing them away, I know exactly when I hit the horticultural grit and I'm digging out that I don't need to dig any further. And it's like almost a symbolic layer within the pot that actually I've reached the layer where the bulbs are sat, and I shouldn't be finding any bulbs after that. So the first thing that I'm putting in there is a good layer of horticultural grit. It doesn't need to be too much. We're going to add another layer on the top, and I'll talk you through why we do that in just a moment. So the horticultural grit is in. I'm going to take my gloves back off. Don't know where the dog's gone. She's somewhere about. So the first thing that's going to go on in is the larger tulips. The Foxy Foxtrot are going to go in first. These are I've already planted some of these this year. Now, traditionally, you would always wait for the first hard frost to be planting tulip bulbs. Otherwise, they can actually rot or wilt off in the ground. However, here on the south coast of England, it is very, very rare for us to ever get a frost, and it very rarely actually comes at the right time of year. So as long as you're confident you're buying your bulbs from a reputable source and you've purchased them online from someone you trust, and they're reputable, I would go ahead and plant. And if the temperatures have now already dropped down, I can't see us getting really below this kind of temperature much before Christmas. And then it becomes really quite late, and the tulips are actually impacted because the bulb has started to shrink and the quality has started to fail. So at this time of year, if you're working somewhere particularly mild like we are here in the UK, you're going to have to get on and plant them sometime. However, if you are planting somewhere where you are likely to get a nice sharp frost, hopefully beginning of November, save planting your tulip bulbs until then. But I'm going to go ahead and crack mine on now. So these are the Foxy Foxtrot. These are going to go in the bulb in the pot here. Right, I'm going to actually, bear with me a second, it's going to be a bit untidy while I do this. I'm going to come across and I'm going to grab you and I'm going to just move you a little closer and I'll bring the camera down, so hopefully you might be able to actually see what I'm doing. So bear with me 1 second while I get that sorted out for you, because you don't need to see me for a moment. Let's just talk amongst yourselves for a moment. I'm going to pull you up on that one. There we go. And move you forward on that one. There we go. You can see what I'm doing a little bit better now. Let's move you backwards so you can see. Right, so the Foxy Foxtrot are going in first. I'm going to space those out. I think this particular packet only contains 10. So Foxy Foxtrot going in first, because I'm going to add those to the actual layer there. Just space them out nice and evenly. I'm then going to add some more compost. I'm going to put my gloves back on because I'm going to have to touch my phone again in a minute. And iPhones and compost and grit and gravel don't really mix very well. So a little layer of compost going back in. This has had a thoroughly good check through. There's nothing nasty in here. So I'm using a mixture of compost that came out of this pot, and I'm also using a blend. I've actually blended some compost back into it. These white bits you see are actually the roots from the banana, which I'm actually going to discard. Right, so that's layer one gone in. The next layer is another layer of tulips. We're going to be adding Sweet Valley is the next one. Now, if you're having problems in the garden with a pesky squirrel or rodents eating your bulbs, I would suggest you try and plant your bulbs a little bit deeper. Most bulbs are planted about 4 or 5 times their actual size and depth. If you have a problem with some squirrels eating your bulbs, I suggest you plant them up to 6 or 7 times their actual depth. All that's going to happen to them is they're going to take a little bit longer to come up. So don't worry about planting them a little bit deeper. Also, the next top layer, which is going to be horticultural grit at the very, very top, is also then going to act as a deterrent for the squirrels. And I'll talk you through another couple of defense mechanisms you can do also at the end. So 10 of the Sweet Valley tulips also going into there, just placing them in between the Foxy Foxtrot, so I get a nice blend as they all come up together. Just insert them, incidentally, pointy side up, flat side down. These are just starting to show a little bit of interest in producing roots. So I'm literally planting these at the perfect time. So those are the 2 varieties of tulip that have gone in. I'm then going to top those off with a little bit of compost again, just to cover those up and keep those safe. Compost going in next. Again, I don't want too much. All I'm doing at this stage is making sure that the bulbs don't touch each other. You can plant as many bulbs as you like in a container, as long as you can keep it watered. But what you don't want to do is have the bulbs touching in any way, shape or form. So you just want to add enough compost, enough growing media between your layers to make sure that your bulbs aren't actually touching each other. Right, next going in are the standard Tate-a-Tate. I say these are a fabulous, well-renowned bulb. I'm just going to pour them out there. There is 20 Tate-a-Tate going in here. So again, I'm not going to pay much attention to where they go. You can feel when you pop them into the soil whether they're on top of a tulip or not. And if you find yourself sitting directly on top of somebody else underneath you, just move them like that one is off to the side just a little bit so they all come up next to each other. At this stage, don't be tempted to compact your soil too heavily. If you do, and you're planting bulbs on this level and there's many bulbs in a container, you can often find that actually the bulbs will push their way out of the pot. So if you've compacted the soil too much, they'll actually push their way forward and lift all the soil at the same time, which you don't want. So that is the Tate-a-Tate going in there. And the very, very last layer, I'm going to plant these alongside the Tate-a-Tate. These are the alliums. These are tiny, tiny little bulbs. This one is called Rosy Beauty. new for 2024, 2025 from Farmer Gracie, a really, really lovely, vivid, sort of baby pink allium. So I'm looking forward to seeing this one. You can see the bulbs are desperate in need of getting tucked into, and that lovely rosy colour coming through on the actual bulb themselves. So I'm just going to pop those in alongside. Again, once again, you can see little amounts of growth coming on there and the roots already starting to actually form. So getting these in the ground at the ideal time, which is perfect, because we want those roots to actually find something. Any bulbs that are, funny enough, are poor quality, this one has rotted, need to be discarded. So that one can go in a bush, and anything else can be planted. Again, spacing those out nice and naturally throughout the planter. Those are my 4 different types of bulbs. So just to recap, you have bulb tulip foxy foxtrot, you've got tulip sweet valley, you've then got the standard and very basic tate-a-tate, topped off with allium rosy beauty going into this planter. I am then going to fill it right up with multi-purpose compost. To say this is a mix that I've put to one side, which is not only the compost that came out of the pots, but also blended with a little bit of fresh media. I'm going to now just fill the pot up all the way to the top with the compost. In it goes. Need to leave myself a little bit of room at the top for the next stage. Normally we like to leave around 1 inch to 1.5 inches for a large pot like this of free soil at the very top. Discard any bits and pieces. So there are some banana roots in there, which is not going to cause any problem. And at this stage, don't be tempted to get yourself in there and really compact that down. What we don't want to do is make sure those bulbs aren't forcing the compost out of the pot. Then I'm going to top the whole thing off with a mix of polyanthus. Sorry, these are primroses, not polyanthus. I talked extensively about polyanthus and primroses on my podcast this week and the difference between the 2 cultivars. I'm actually going to be using primroses in this one, mixed primroses. I'm just going to put probably 6 or 8 around the top of these. I'm not worried about the colour. These are going to flower for the next couple of months and take me through to when the actual bulbs come up. I think maybe just, what's that, 5 in the top there, and I'm just going to use my hand just to dip those in. Obviously you don't want to be planting them too deep because you don't want to be disturbing the bulbs below. Pop them in, and then we are going to top the entire thing off with horticultural grit. And I'm going to turn the camera round and I'm going to talk to you for a little bit and talk you through why we're going to do that. So hopefully you can now see that is the planter all done, leaving a nice lip of around 1.5 inches to 2 inches down the side. And we've done that so we can get plenty of water into that. Not now, because I know there's going to be plenty of rain about for the next couple of months, but I've left a nice gap there because when these tulips and these daffodils come up, they are going to need a significant amount of water. So I've left that there so I can actually, there we go. Hi, I'm back again. I've left that gap there. So in, say, March and April and into May, I can get plenty of water into this tub because you want a couple of inches to make sure that you seep right down into the side of the container. I'm now going to dress the entire pot off with horticultural grit. You can also use crushed eggshell at this particular point. There's a whelk shell product from Shell on Earth you can use. Personally, I will normally use the horticultural grit, mainly because it's readily available. I really love the crushed whelk shell, especially like it because it's a byproduct of the food industry. But horticultural grit is much easier to get hold of, for instance, at my local garden centre. I tend to use that. The reason why I'm going to dress this pot off with horticultural grit is to stop the splashback. Now, not only will this actually dull the smell down of the bulbs below, hopefully deterring the squirrel just a little bit, but it will also stop the splashback onto the leaves and especially the flowers of these primroses. Primroses are very different to polyanthus. Primroses will flower right down very, very low at the actual base of the plant. And quite often in our winters here in England, the splashback will completely and utterly ruin the flowers. So obviously you can imagine on a micro level, the water coming down quite heavily, it will splash off the compost and really spoil the blooms. And once they're wet, they tend to go really soggy and moldy and just rot. However, if you surround them with horticultural grit or crushed eggshell or sand, it does one of 2 things. Not only will it keep the pesky slugs and snails off of them, especially if you're growing things like alliums, the slugs and snails will absolutely adore to eat their foliage along with the tulips, but it'll also stop the splashback on the bedding plants you put on the top, thus meaning they last a lot longer. It also deters the squirrel from getting in here as well. Right, so I'm going to get my gloves back on, and I'm now going to top this off with horticultural grit, and then it's finished and done and dusted. This container will then get a really thoroughly good water, and it will be remaining here up on the top patio for a couple of months. So all I'm going to do is say, with a couple of scoopfuls of horticultural grit, make sure that you don't get this all over the foliage of your plants. What you don't want to do is trap the leaves underneath the grit, because they will then rot, and that completely it's completely the thing that you're trying to avoid. So just hold the foliage in your hands as you do it, and spread the horticultural grit around the actual plants. I think this looks really smart. It looks really professional, but most people have no idea why it's done. They just think it's one of these things that us funny traditional horticulturalists do, but it's one of the reasons. I say it stops them rotting, keeps the squirrels at bay, and deters the slugs and snails. So it's a bit of a no-brainer. A bag of horticultural grit is only going to cost you about £3 or £4. So it's not particularly expensive. That's the last of that. Just give that a good spread out with your hands, and then you can give that a thoroughly good water. If you water it with a watering can with a rose on it, it will wash off any debris or horticultural grit you may have actually got onto any of the plants that you've topped your bedding off with. The last thing to do, and this is the important bit, never skip this stage, especially if you're like me, sharing your craft online. I'm not saying it's not worth doing, but if you don't know what you're growing and you haven't labelled it, there's absolutely no point. You will be you'll be cancelled online normally. So make sure that you now add your labels, and I've got them here somewhere. I've already written them out. I've labelled them up already. So that's the Foxy Foxtrot, the Sweet Valley Tulips, and of course then the Rosy Allium, all labelled up, ready for the spring. So when I come to photograph this and share this across my media channels, whether it's here on YouTube, on TikTok, or on Instagram, I know exactly what I'm taking pictures of. It also is a good idea to do if you have chosen a particular variety with tulips like I have there. It is not unheard of for these things to get mixed up. So if you do end up with a little bit of a problem, you can always go back to your grower and say, excuse me, I actually bought X, Y, and Z, and these aren't X, Y, and Z, because they've got mixed up. So you stand a better chance of actually getting your money back if that happens. Doesn't happen with reputable growers, but it does happen. Things don't get mixed up. So I hope you've enjoyed today's tutorial. I'm just going to lean forward and I'm going to have a look and see whether there is any comments on here. So Mindy's channel has just received 80 bulbs that she forgot to grow. I think my total bulb order was about 1,500 this year, and I went off to the garden centre this morning and bought a whole load more. Normally it's about 3,000, but I've been very contained this year, only really wanting to pop bulbs into my pot. So good luck, Mindy, for putting those in. Someone say they like my beard. Yeah, it's looking all right at the moment. I have to get there a bit shorter. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed today's live about planting bulb lasagnas. Please get out there and give it a go. You'll be amazed at how much colour and interest you can pack into the garden. And if you wanted to know more about the subject, do head over to Spotify, Amazon Music, or Apple Music, and catch the latest edition of the Gardener Ben podcast. It's available with this stream across all platforms now. Same username, _Gardener Ben. I will see you all again very soon. Take care now. Bye-bye.